Welcome back to the Law Factor Live. You have until 9:30 tonight to send in your answers for our giveaways. Here's a quick reminder of the questions. To win an official first aid kit, tell us what year was St. John's Ambulance first established in St. Lucia. To win a shirt from AF Valmore, Valmore has 20% discount for Dad ending this Sunday. Tell us which Valmore location with a clothing department opens on Sunday. That's the hint, with a clothing department. How long has Sisson's Infinity Colour Shop been in operation? Is it 3, 4 or 5 years? You'll win a really wonderful package for Dad. Now we have, as I said, we were going to be having a change of guests. Of course, we have Glenn Wilson with us now, and I want to now say hello to our new guest, and perhaps you can tell us who you are and what you do.
It's good evening. Thanks for having me. I am Mabias Francis from the Fire Prevention Department of the St. Lucia Fire Service. By duty, I receive building plans and review such plans to be sure that there is a certain level of safety incorporated in the design of such buildings. Once the buildings have been constructed, I would return to such a building to verify or recognize the level of hazards in there and give recommendations on how they could be corrected. Also, I do a life safety education. You know, as we are speaking about here, hurricanes and earthquakes and fires, what should you do in such an event? How can you prepare yourself for such an eventuality?
What, in your, from your experience, what is our failing as St. Lucians when it comes to our general safety, bearing in mind the work that you do?
Preparedness. Most times we're not prepared to deal with eventualities. Even when we know that it's possible that there can be an occurrence, we are not generally prepared to deal with such an occurrence.
Why do you think that is?
Well, we believe we are blessed people, and well, we listen to our radios and watch on televisions the things that happen elsewhere, but we believe it will not happen to us. And so we're generally unprepared for such an eventuality.
And when you go out to see, because you're looking at things perhaps before the emergency happens, do you go back to see the same thing when the emergency happens?
Well, as we said before, an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. And most times we see things, we make recommendations on how they can be corrected, and persons just cast a blind eye. You know, they believe nothing bad will come out of it. But things don't correct themselves unless you are physically doing something about it. They will not correct themselves.
Okay. Now we hear of fires destroying homes, particularly wooden ones, okay? Can you kind of talk us through the more common causes of fire and how to deal with them initially before we actually call emergency, or do we have to call emergency straight away?
We should always call the fire department once there is any emergency, especially related to fire. We should always call the fire department. Fire-wise, one of the reasons why we have a lot of unwanted fires is as a result of the use and misuse of electricity. And let me deal with the misuse. Anytime electricity or energy on a whole is misused, it's likely that heat from that energy will result in the fire. And these fires most times start small, but they grow. Fires usually start small and they grow. So it's very important that we call the fire department once a fire has started.
What is misuse?
Appliances. Sometimes we're not careful in handling the appliances. We are ignorant about the operating voltage. So this is an instance of misuse. Or we tamper with the cord, the electrical cord connecting the appliance to the mains. And because of that, they can be overheating and fires can start. And
what should we do when we have an electrical fire? What should we do? Is there anything we can do before we call you?
Oh, certainly. Isolate the electrical power to the device. That's the very first thing. Go to the mains or the switch and isolate the device from the electricity. And then you just have an ordinary fire. Most times you could use water to extinguish such a fire, but be sure that the electricity has been isolated from the device. That's the very first thing you should do.
Okay, so we turn it off, preferably from the mains if it's not too far away,
yes,
I suppose?
Yes.
Because depending on what the item is, you wouldn't want to go and actually press the mains to turn it off. But what about this thing about standing on paper and you won't get electric shock? I've heard that. Is that true?
No. Generally, no.
You mean I was brought up thinking that I could stand on paper? Or what about wearing rubber?
Well, it is said that if you're grounded, if there is not a direct path to the ground, that you are protected. But the best thing you can do is turn off the mains. All right? Turn off the mains to the device, and then you can treat the item as an ordinary fire. But be sure that the mains has been dealt with.
And what about water and electricity? If you have an electrical fire, I mean, if someone doesn't turn off the mains, what's likely to happen if you throw water on that electrical fire?
Water is a very good conductor of electricity, and we should never use water where electricity is available, where there's possibly a fire in an electrical appliance. Water should never be thrown on such an appliance.
And what about hearing that we should throw rugs and blankets and heavy things on fires? Does that work?
Well, it has a place. There's actually 3 ways fires can be controlled. Smothering, well, you choke the fire. And this is what a rug would do to a fire, like throwing sand on a small fire. You prevent the air from getting to the fire and suffocate the fire or choke it out. So this is the principal measure in using a rug or sand. You can also cool a fire. Remove the heat from the fire by using water. Water is the best way to cool a fire. As we said, water will not work well with electricity. You can get electrocuted. And the third way you can use to extinguish a fire is to remove some of whatever is burning. For example, you have a coal pot, and there is some charcoal in there, and you're cooking some food. The easiest way to reduce the fire on there is remove some of the charcoal. And so there's less heat, less fire in that area.
We actually had a question from a viewer, and the question was, I'm trying to remember it, the question was, if there is a fire in a house and there is a young person and an old person in the house, who do you go to first?
That's a tricky one.
Yes.
We're in the line of saving lives, whether it be old or young. And I'd hate to play God in that situation. But
I'm sure you've had to at some point, or your colleagues would have had to have a call as to, you don't know who's in the house. So I would have said you would have gone to the person you see first, as opposed to the person who needs your help, because you wouldn't know.
True. But if the possibility or the occurrence happens and there's an older person and a younger person, well, again, would hate to pick.
Okay. Yeah, it's a difficult one. Okay, let me ask you another question, and I'm going to ask Glenn a similar one. If there is a fire and someone is recovered from that fire before you get there, and they, obviously they're not with us, they need to be resuscitated of any kind. What's the best way to do that? They have been inside a house, the fumes, how do we deal with that?
Well, we always say once fire has started, to get out of the building and do not return. For the same reason, smoke inhalation, or you can get trapped. But upon arrival at any scene, persons who have been exposed to smoke would normally give them oxygen, all right, or air with a high percentage of oxygen, so they could help them get back to their original state.
But what if you're not there yet, and a neighbor or a friend has taken someone out, and they've passed out already? What can that person do to help resuscitate them? Well,
don't crowd them. Take them in a well-ventilated area. Do not crowd them. Allow them to breathe freely. That's the best you can do for them at that time.
Okay, Glenn, I want to ask you something. Recently in St. Lucia, we've had several fatalities. Of course, we had a drowning incident as well just a few weeks ago. What can we do if we feel or we think that someone is drowning, or they've already drowned? How can we deal with that?
As a first aider responding or first responder responding to a situation like that, one of the things that you need to determine is that, is your casualty conscious and breathing? Sorry, unconscious and breathing, or is the casualty unconscious and not breathing? So you need to be able to determine, is that person still breathing on their own? And if they are, not breathing is considered to be a life-threatening situation. And so therefore, if your casualty is not breathing, then you need to resuscitate that casualty. The beauty about first aid is that it is fashioned after how your body responds naturally to a situation. So earlier on we looked at choking. And when you're choking, the object goes through your airway into your lungs. your brain is able to detect that it is not air going there, therefore your airway begins to close around that object. And so therefore your brain also sends a command to your diaphragm to say push up, and then that's why you cough and to try to allow to push out the object. So first aid is fashioned after those very same principles. So a situation where your casualty is not breathing and unconscious, what you need to do is to try to resuscitate them. So you do the CPR, but in our local context we call it mouth to mouth. But it has 2 steps. So you do, the full term for CPR is cardiopulmonary resuscitation. What you're trying to do is to try to resuscitate a casualty's heart and the casualty's lungs. Cardio, heart, pulmonary, lungs. And how you resuscitate a casualty's heart is to do chest compressions to the center of the chest between the breasts using your hand. To resuscitate the lungs, you do the rescue breaths or the mouth to mouth to the lungs, where you administer air into the casualty's lungs. Very easy to do. The cycles are 30 chest compressions to 2 rescue breaths after every 30 chest compressions. You need to keep a momentum, and there are different easy methods to learn that, and it is quite simple, and it saves lives.
All right, and we'll talk a little bit about that more after the break, because there are a couple of reservations about mouth-to-mouth as well. We need to talk about that. After the break, we're going to take your calls, and we've closed the entries for the giveaways. This is the Law Factor Live on DBS. We'll be right back.